The afternoon sun hung low over Fort Riker's vast motor pool, washing the concrete yard in a hot, metallic glare. Rows of armored vehicles stood silent and imposing, but at the center of the chaos sat the one machine no one dared go near now, an M1 Abrams silent as a tomb. Its panels were open, diagnostic cables hanging like lifeless veins, and a team of frustrated engineers circled it with defeated faces. "Face it," one of the senior engineers groaned, tossing his wrench onto a toolbox with a loud clang. "This Abrams is dead. Nothing can bring it back." The line hit the air like a challenge. A few on-site mechanics exchanged nervous glances. A couple of visiting families, touring the base for family observation day, paused, sensing the tension. Even the young lieutenant in charge, Lieutenant Harris, stiffened at the words. "That's enough," Harris snapped, though the slight tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Let's run the diagnostics again." "We've run them 5 times, another engineer shot back. "Power routing is fried. Starter controls unresponsive. Turret interface is glitching. This thing shouldn't even exist in this condition unless someone dropped a lightning bolt in the engine bay." A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the mechanics, but Harris wasn't smiling. His eyes drifted toward the tank, its massive 120mm gun pointed at nothing, its armored hull a monument to silence. An Abrams wasn't just a vehicle, it was a symbol of strength. Seeing one disabled like this felt wrong. Visitors whispered among themselves. Was this normal? Could a tank really just die? The embarrassment simmered on Harris's face. 2 engineers resumed arguing loudly. "It's over. Scrap it." "No, we don't scrap a $3 million war machine." "Then you fix it." "I can't fix a tank that refuses to talk back." Their voices echoed off the metal structures, drawing more attention than Harris wanted. He prepared to shout them down. And that's when a shadow crossed behind him. Colonel Weber had been quietly observing from a short distance, hands behind his back, face unreadable. He listened calmly to the chaos, the complaints, the frustration. When the last engineer snapped, "Nothing can bring this tank back," the colonel finally stepped forward. His voice was low, controlled, but it cut through the noise like a command etched in steel. "Call him." Silence fell instantly. Engineers froze. Mechanics looked up. Even the families felt the shift in the air. Because everyone knew exactly who he meant. The colonel's order, "Call him," lingered in the air long after he walked away, leaving the engineers frozen like they'd been hit by a flashbang. No one wanted to be the first to speak or even the first to breathe too loudly. Lieutenant Harris swallowed hard, trying to shake the heaviness settling over the motor pool. "All right," he said, clearing his throat. "Let's stay focused. We still have procedures. Run the full diagnostic sweep again. Check power routing. Check system handshakes. Check the ECU." An engineer lifted a tablet, exasperated. "Sir, the systems aren't handshaking, because the systems aren't even acknowledging they exist." "Run it again," Harris repeated. The engineer sighed, stabbed the tablet screen, and the familiar hum of electronic checks began, only to end with the same harsh red beeps. "Failure. System not found. Starter link offline. No response." The sound was starting to feel like a siren announcing defeat. A second engineer crawled out from under the tank, grease streaking his cheek. "Hydraulic lines are clean. Battery connectors are clean. Fuel flow is fine." He tossed his gloves down. "This shouldn't be happening." "Maybe it's the turbine?" another suggested. "The turbine is fine. I swear this tank is messing with us on purpose." A couple of mechanics chuckled nervously, but the tension didn't lift. The Abrams loomed there, hulking, patient, like it was listening. Harris rubbed the back of his neck. His uniform collar suddenly felt too tight. Around them, families tried not to stare, but they couldn't help it. Kids pointed. Parents hushed them quietly. Soldiers returning from lunch slowed down to whisper to each other. And then the first rumor slipped out. "Did you hear?" a specialist muttered to a corporal near the fence line. The colonel told them to call him. The corporal looked up sharply. "No way. They're seriously calling that guy?" "That's what the lieutenant said." The corporal let out a low whistle. "Then things must be bad. Really bad." Rumors in a base travel faster than radio signals. Within minutes, whispers circled like vultures. Was he even still alive? "He's retired, wasn't he?" "No, he just disappeared after the Fallujah thing." "I heard he can diagnose a tank by sound alone." "My uncle said he once fixed an Abrams during an ambush." "Someone told me he drove with half a powertrain missing." A private added, wide-eyed, My sergeant told me he can tell if an Abrams is off balance just by touching the hull. The Abrams itself seemed to absorb the whispers, looming like a silent legend. There was something almost mythical about the way it sat there, too intact to be truly broken, too dead to be alive. A war machine under a spell. Harris tried to regain control of the atmosphere. Keep working. Stay professional. We don't know if he's actually coming. But the tremor in his voice whispered a different truth. He was afraid the colonel meant every word. One of the senior engineers stepped forward, arms crossed. Sir, if he comes here, just know, he doesn't exactly do things by the book. Harris blew out a sharp breath. At this point, I don't care if he rewires it with chewing gum. Another diagnostic beeped, then failed. Again. The tablet operator groaned. This tank is mocking us. They gathered around the open engine bay. Everything looked normal. Everything should have been fine. And yet, the Abrams remained as silent and cold as a tomb. A mechanic finally voiced what they were all thinking. How did this even happen? This model doesn't just die. The senior engineer shook his head. This exact tank, hull #M1-2497, has history. Combat tours. Close calls. Didn't think I'd ever see it broken like this. Wait, Harris asked slowly, isn't this the one he? Yes, the engineer cut in. This is the tank he drove. A hush fell over the group. The whispers grew louder across the yard. He's coming. He has to be. They're calling the Steel Ghost. He knows this tank better than the manuals do. And for the first time, even Lieutenant Harris couldn't deny the feeling growing in his gut. Whatever was wrong with this Abrams. Only one man alive might be able to understand it. Long before the whispers reached the motor pool, long before the engineers knew fear at the sight of a silent Abrams, there was another battlefield, one that had carved a legend into the desert sands. Fallujah, Iraq. 14 years earlier. The sky was a burning haze. Smoke curled upward from shattered rooftops. The air vibrated with the rumble of distant explosions. Streets were choked with debris, and the heat radiating off burning metal felt like standing inside a furnace. In the middle of that chaos, a lone M1 Abrams thundered forward, moving not like a $3 million machine, but like a living, breathing beast tearing through hell itself. Inside the turret stood Staff Sergeant Raymond Cole. Calm, focused, completely still in the storm of combat. His hands danced over the controls with the precision of a surgeon, yet his voice, steady, low, was the only thing keeping his crew from succumbing to the chaos. Loader, stay sharp. Gunner, eyes left. Driver, don't worry, we're not dying today. Even as RPGs cracked against nearby walls and tracer fire sliced across their path, Cole never raised his voice. The world outside screamed, burned, shattered, but he remained quiet. Almost eerily so. Contact, multiple hostiles, rooftop, the gunner reported. I see them, Cole replied, tone flat. The turret spun. The cannon roared. The rooftop disintegrated. That day the Abrams had taken a beating. Mobility kill. Radio down. Fuel pumps sputtering like a dying heartbeat. Their armored column had been ambushed and split apart. A deadly trap. 19 American vehicles were pinned down. Insurgents were closing in. And the only operational tank left was Cole's. Everyone expected him to pull back. Cole didn't. He opened the hatch, stood halfway outside despite the gunfire, and scanned the smoke with bare eyes. Sir, what are you doing? The driver shouted. Cole's response was calm, almost conversational. Listening. A bullet whizzed past his ear. He didn't flinch. From the outside it looked like insanity. But Cole was doing what he always did, reading the battlefield through instinct built on scars and survival. When the radio crackled back to life with a faint signal, he knew their column was minutes from being wiped out. And so he made his choice. We go. Engines dying, but so are they if we don't move. The tank jerked forward, wounded but unbroken. Cole maneuvered it through alleys barely wider than a Humvee, using the Abrams' weight to bulldoze obstacles, using the shadows of burning buildings to mask their movement. RPGs flew. Walls collapsed. Every second felt like borrowed time. At one point, the hydraulics gave out and the turret froze. Sir, we have no traverse, the gunner yelled. Cole didn't hesitate. Then we'll fight forward. They plowed straight into enemy positions, using the tank itself as a battering ram. At close range, too close, Cole fired the coaxial gun manually, clearing the path inch by inch. And then came the moment people still talk about. A massive IED detonated ahead of them, flipping a Humvee and pinning two soldiers beneath scrap metal. Cole ordered his driver to stop. He climbed out, alone, and sprinted into the firestorm. Shrapnel tore across his shoulder, but he lifted the debris with raw desperation, dragging both men out before the flames swallowed the wreckage. Back in the tank, bleeding and exhausted, he simply muttered, "Drive." By sunset, Cole had guided the crippled Abrams across 6 blocks of active fighting, reached the besieged column, and used the tank as both shield and spear to break them out. Not a single soldier under his watch died that day. When they returned to base, covered in dust and dried blood, a private whispered, "He's not a man, he's a ghost in steel." The nickname stuck. Steel Ghost. Not because he was fearless, but because he moved through war with a quietness that defied it. Back in the present, Colonel Weber remembered that day well. He had watched Cole drag the wounded out, run back into the tank, and keep fighting as if the flames didn't exist. And that's why, when the Abrams and the motor pool fell silent, when engineers gave up, when the young lieutenant panicked, the colonel didn't hesitate. The manuals couldn't save that tank. The engineers couldn't revive it. But one man had done the impossible before. One man understood Abrams not as machines, but as living comrades that spoke in groans, rattles, and vibrations. One man had driven this exact tank through hell and brought it home. Staff Sergeant Raymond Steel Ghost Cole. The legend wasn't dead. He was just waiting for the call. The afternoon heat was beginning to fade when he arrived. No fanfare. No briefing. No entourage. Just a quiet figure stepping onto the motor pool concrete, ball cap low, sleeves rolled, boots dusty from the long walk across base. Staff Sergeant Raymond Steel Ghost Cole didn't look like a legend. He looked like someone who'd simply wandered over to check on an old friend. Most people didn't even notice him at first. A few soldiers glanced his way, saw a man in an old field jacket, and turned back to their conversations. Even Lieutenant Harris, who was reviewing yet another failed diagnostic readout, didn't recognize him. Cole stopped a few yards from the disabled Abrams. For a long moment he didn't move. He just looked at it. The tank, towering, silent, intimidating to everyone else, seemed almost smaller in his presence, like a proud animal recognizing the one person it trusted. Harris finally spotted him. Sir? This is a restricted area. Visitors aren't." Cole didn't seem to hear. He took a slow step forward. Then another. His eyes traced the tank's exterior, the small marks on the glassy plate, the faint burn discoloration on the left skirt. He moved closer with a familiarity no one else had shown. Finally, Harris cleared his throat again. "Sir, may I ask who?" Cole raised one hand slightly, not to silence him but like someone listening for a faint sound. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "she doesn't like noise." The engineers exchanged confused glances. "She?" one muttered. Harris frowned. "Sir, who?" But then the senior engineer's eyes widened with recognition. "Hold on, is that?" Cole didn't introduce himself. Instead, he stepped directly to the tank's right track, knelt beside the road wheels, and placed his hand against the armor. His fingers spread slowly like someone feeling for a pulse. A small crowd began to form. Mechanics, privates, visiting families, soldiers passing by. The rumors had taken on a life of their own, and now the legend stood before them, quietly inspecting the machine everyone else had surrendered on. "Why's he touching it?" a young mechanic whispered. "He's feeling for something," another guessed. Cole stood, walked around the tank's nose and paused at the left side. His hand brushed the turret's skin, then rested on the mounting bracket. His expression stayed unreadable. Harris approached cautiously. "Sir, we've already run all tests. The main systems aren't responding." Cole didn't answer. Instead he leaned close to the hull, placing his ear against the cool steel. He closed his eyes. The onlookers fell silent. This wasn't engineering. This wasn't protocol. This was something else, something instinctual. Cole whispered softly, so quietly only the closest engineers heard. "She's tired." The engineers exchanged bewildered looks. "What does that even mean?" one hissed. Cole took a slow breath, stepped back and tapped a point on the hull. "Pull this panel." Harris blinked. "Sir, that's just access to the secondary routing plate. We already checked." Cole turned, finally meeting his eyes. "You checked the panel?" he said. "Not what's behind it." A ripple went through the crowd. Two engineers rushed over, tools in hand. They unscrewed the cover plate, pulled it free, and immediately froze. "What the?" Harris leaned over their shoulders. A cable bundle sat tucked deep beyond the panel, nearly invisible unless someone looked at an angle. One of the primary lines had been scorched, not snapped, not severed, but partially melted in a way that allowed just enough contact to confuse every diagnostic system. It was a battlefield injury, a type no lab training could predict. One engineer whispered, shaken. How did you even know to look there? Cole didn't answer. He simply stepped aside, eyes drifting back to the tank. He began walking again, slowly, deliberately, circling the turret, trailing one hand along the armor. He paused at the commander's hatch. His fingers grazed its edge, then slid down toward the radio conduits. Another whisper left his lips. Thought so. He tapped the radio housing once. Loose fuse bracket, he said. That's your ghost signal. The engineers blinked. Ghost signal? Harris felt heat rising in his throat. He'd read about ghost signals, false readings caused by tiny lapses in conductivity, but he'd never seen one. They were nearly impossible to detect. Cole stepped back again, eyes scanning the whole tank, taking in every detail with quiet intensity. Someone in the crowd murmured, "He's not checking the tank. He's reading it." Cole continued his slow rotation until he reached the engine bay. He stepped inside the maintenance platform, ducked under a panel, and placed his palm directly against the turbine housing. He breathed in, then out. "Fuel pump skipping," he said. "That's impossible," an engineer argued. "We ran." Cole rapped the housing with two knuckles. A hollow clink echoed. The engineer shut his mouth. Cole turned to Harris. "Your tank's not dead, Lieutenant. She's just confused." The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. Cole's voice dropped to a calm certainty. "Give me 10 minutes with her. And no one touches anything." Harris nodded slowly. The colonel's words echoed in his mind. "If he says step back, you step back." And so they did. The crowd pulled away. The engineers backed off. Even the children in the visiting families went silent. Because now the legend stood alone beside the Abrams. Hands on steel, eyes narrowed in focus, listening to a machine that no one else could hear. And in that moment everyone understood. He wasn't fixing a tank. He was waking it up. The motor pool had become unnaturally quiet, so quiet that even the hum of distant generators seemed muted. All eyes were fixed on the lone figure beside the silent M1 Abrams, hands pressed against its steel, every muscle in his body tuned to something no one else could sense. Staff Sergeant Raymond Steele Ghost Cole stood motionless, absorbed in his work. Then footsteps echoed across the concrete. Heavy, deliberate, commanding. Colonel Weber approached with the weight of someone who had spent decades in armor command. His uniform crisp, his jaw set, and his gaze unwavering. Soldiers straightened instinctively as he passed, conversations dying instantly. The tension that already gripped the motor pool tightened. Lieutenant Harris snapped to attention. "Colonel on deck." Weber didn't return the salute immediately. His eyes locked onto Cole. "How long has he been at it?" Weber asked quietly. "A few minutes, sir," Harris replied. "He's, doing something with the hull. Putting his ear to it. Touching the armor. It's not standard protocol, sir." The colonel's eyes narrowed, not in disapproval but in memory. "It was never protocol," he murmured. "But it worked." Harris shifted awkwardly. "Sir, I'm not sure if this is even safe or effective." Weber turned his head slowly, fixing Harris with a stare that made the young officer straighten even more. "Lieutenant," he said, voice low, "you called me because your engineers gave up. You called me because your diagnostics failed. You called me because you failed." Harris swallowed. "Yes, sir." "And now," Weber continued, "you doubt the one man who pulled an Abrams out of a burning city with no turret traverse, failing hydraulics and half a fuel pump?" Harris didn't answer. He didn't need to. The colonel had already moved past him. Cole stepped away from the engine housing, brushing dust off his hands. He didn't salute. He didn't even look surprised to see the colonel. "Ray," Weber said. Cole nodded once. "Sir." "How's she holding up?" Cole exhaled slowly, eyes drifting to the tank's hull. "Confused. Hurting. But she's alive." Those words confused the engineers, but the colonel understood them immediately. "Do what you need," Weber said. That was all Cole needed to hear. He moved to the front of the tank and lifted one hand, signaling the crowd. "Everyone," he said quietly, "step back." The engineers hesitated. Mechanics exchanged uncertain looks. Harris blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Sir," the lieutenant whispered to the colonel, "we need to keep this controlled. This isn't how procedures." Weber cut him off sharply. "Lieutenant Harris," he said, his voice dropping into steel, "if he says step back, you step back." Weber's gaze swept across the engineers, the mechanics, the families watching from behind the barriers. Then came the line that froze the motor pool in place. He's seen Abrams bleeding in combat. Silence fell so fast it felt physical. No one questioned anything after that. The engineers stepped back. The mechanics stepped back. Even the families instinctively took a step away from the fence, as if the ground itself demanded space. Cole walked forward, the echo of his boots the only sound. He approached the turret's left side again, tapping lightly with his knuckles, listening for inconsistencies. Then he crouched beside the track tensioner, fingers sliding along its edge with the gentleness of someone checking a pulse. Harris leaned toward the colonel. "Sir, with all due respect, what exactly is he doing?" "What he always does," Weber said. "Listening. Feeling. Understanding. That's not technical." "No," the colonel said, "it's not. It's something better." Cole stood again, moving toward the rear of the tank. He paused near the exhaust grill. "She's cold," he murmured. "Not dead. Just scared." "Scared?" Harris whispered, bewildered. "Sir, tanks don't." "Tanks remember," Weber interrupted. "Especially ones like this." Cole climbed onto the tank with the ease of someone who had done so thousands of times. He knelt on the turret, unscrewing a small inspection plate with his bare hands, something the engineers had insisted was impossible without a tool. He lifted the plate, examined the wiring beneath it, and nodded once. "There you are," he whispered as if speaking to a wounded soldier. "Hiding again." The engineer stiffened. What did he find? Cole didn't answer. He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket, adjusted a connector, tightened a loose ground link, and tapped the casing with his fingers. Then he sat back on his heels, breathing deeply, hands resting on the turret like a healer stepping away from a patient. "Back up," Cole ordered again. "All the way. Give her room." Without hesitation this time, everyone obeyed. Harris whispered, "Sir, do you really think this will work?" Weber didn't blink. "I've seen him do more with a broken tank than most can do with a fully staffed motor pool." Cole hopped down from the turret, wiping his hands on his trousers. He stepped up to the Abrams, placing one palm against the glassy plate, eyes closing for a final moment of connection. Then he spoke so quietly the engineers barely heard it. "Wake up." He stepped back. The crowd held its breath. Nothing moved. No sound. Just the weight of anticipation pressing down on everyone. Then, a faint click echoed from deep inside the tank. The crowd jolted. Cole didn't move. Another click. A relay. A systems handshake. Lights flickered inside the driver's hatch. A whisper of power rolled through the Abrams frame like a heartbeat returning. Cole opened his eyes. "She's ready," he said. And every person in that motor pool realized something profound. This wasn't engineering. This wasn't luck. This was a bond forged in fire, fear, and survival. And only the steel ghost could command a dead tank to breathe again. The crowd held its breath as the veteran stayed crouched beside the disabled M1 Abrams, his gloved hand resting against the armor as if he could hear something inside it no one else could. Engineers whispered behind him, rattled. The lieutenant stood stiff, trying not to show how nervous he was. The colonel watched in silence, arms crossed as if he already knew how this would end. For a long moment, the veteran didn't move. Then finally he spoke. "Your diagnostics were right," he said softly. "But your conclusion wasn't." He pointed beneath the turret ring. "Everyone thought this tank was dead. But it's not dead. It's choking." The engineers blinked at each other. "Choking?" one muttered. "On what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slid under the tank with a confidence that made the lieutenant flinch. "Sir, that area's unsafe too." The colonel held up a hand. "Let him work." A few seconds later, the veteran's voice echoed from beneath the steel giant. "You ran computer tests. Good. But computers only tell you what they can read." He tapped a metal panel twice. Tink tink. "The field tells you what machines can't." The lieutenant leaned to the colonel. "What is he doing?" "Listening," the colonel replied. "Same way he survived Fallujah." A harsh metallic clink echoed as the veteran removed a small access plate. He slid out from under the tank, holding a component between his fingers, burnt, cracked, barely recognizable. The engineers gasped. That's impossible," one whispered. "We checked every module." The veteran shook his head. "Not this one. It only fails under real battlefield strain." He held up the damaged part. "Heat expansion, vibration, sand infiltration. This kind of fault only shows itself after the tank's been pushed to its limits." "You're telling me all our systems missed that?" the lieutenant asked. "Yes," the veteran replied, "because you've only seen Abrams in textbooks, not in gunfights." The colonel smiled knowingly. Without wasting another second, the veteran grabbed his weathered toolkit. None of the tools looked new, each carried dents, scars, marks of years spent on unforgiving soil. He selected one and worked with swift, precise movements. Engineers crowded closer, trying to follow his motions. Some even recorded on phones despite rules. The veteran didn't seem bothered. He was somewhere else, back in the desert, back in the heat, back in the places where every second mattered. When he finished replacing the component, he did something that confused everyone. He climbed onto the tank's hull, leaned down, and pressed his ear against the armor, like listening for a heartbeat. A full minute passed. He exhaled. There it is. There what is? The lieutenant asked, voice cracking. The pulse. She's ready. He hopped down and gestured. Clear the area. Nobody stands behind the exhaust when she wakes up. People moved fast. Even the skeptical lieutenant obeyed instantly. The veteran climbed into the driver's compartment. His fingers moved with the confidence of someone who had done this in smoke, in chaos, under fire. He flipped a series of switches, paused, and looked at the colonel through the periscope. You sure they're ready for this? The colonel smirked. They're about to learn why I called you. The veteran turned the master power lever. For a moment, nothing. Then a deep, ancient hum rolled through the ground. The engineer stiffened. The lieutenant's eyes widened. Families watching from behind barricades leaned closer. The veteran pressed the ignition. The Abrams roared. A blast of hot air screamed from the exhaust grills. Dust shot into the sky. The ground vibrated. That unmistakable, thunderous turbine sound filled the motor pool, alive, loud, powerful. The crowd erupted. The colonel stepped forward, shouting over the engine, "Gentlemen, this is what experience looks like." The lieutenant approached the veteran as he climbed out, wiping grease from his hands. I didn't believe you knew what you were doing," the lieutenant admitted. "I thought this tank was beyond saving." The veteran placed a hand on his shoulder, not harshly but firmly. "Machines don't fail because they're weak," he said. "They fail because the people maintaining them forget what they were built for." "And what's that?" the lieutenant asked. The veteran looked back at the rumbling Abrams. "War," he answered. "Real war. And war teaches lessons no manual ever will." The colonel joined them. "Remember this, Lieutenant," he said. "Textbooks don't build legends, battlefields do." The engineers nodded, humbled. The Abrams engine thundered on, echoing across the base like a returning war cry. And for the first time all day, everyone believed again. The Abrams was still idling like a waking giant when the veteran gathered his tools, slid them back into his weathered bag and tightened the strap over his shoulder. No announcement. No speech. No desire for applause. As quietly as he had arrived, he stepped off the motor pool concrete and onto the gravel path leading away from the crowd. Most people didn't notice he was leaving. They were too busy celebrating the miracle in front of them, the supposedly dead tank that now growled with power. But the colonel noticed. He always noticed. "Leaving already?" he called out. The veteran paused only long enough to glance back. "You didn't call me for attention. You called me for the tank. And the tank's breathing again." The colonel nodded, satisfied. "Take care, Ghost." The veteran gave a faint nod and continued walking, his footsteps fading between the rows of armored giants. By the time the engineers turned around to thank him, he was gone, like a story that belonged to another era. Later that evening, after the crowd dispersed and the motor pool quieted to its usual steel and oil silence, the engineers gathered inside the Abrams turret. They'd pulled out a small metal plate, hand-cut, polished, and engraved with simple but heavy words. "In honor of the Steel Ghost. The man who listened when the tank spoke." They screwed it into place beneath the turret controls. A spot no outsider might ever notice, but every crewman who ever fought inside this machine would see it. When they were scared, when they were tired, when they doubted themselves. A reminder that legends aren't ghosts at all. They're people who refuse to stop listening. The lieutenant ran a finger over the plate, his expression different now, more grounded, more humble. He exhaled slowly. "He really saved this tank," he said. "He saved more than that," the colonel replied from behind him. "He saved your future as an officer. He taught you what we forget when we trust manuals more than men." The lieutenant swallowed. "Experience matters." "Experience," the colonel said softly, "is written in scars. Not in textbooks." Across the base, in the barracks and the mess hall and the maintenance shops, the story already spread like wildfire. "You should have seen it," one mechanic told a group of young soldiers. "He didn't even run tests. He just touched the hull and knew." Another soldier leaned in. Yeah, but is it true he once drove an Abrams with half the electronics dead and still got his whole column out of an ambush? Man, not just an ambush, someone else said. Fallujah. He's the reason they call him Steel Ghost. Soon the story grew its own shape, half fact, half legend, all respect. Recruits repeated it in whispers. Veterans nodded knowingly. Commanders tucked it into their leadership talks. And somewhere on the far side of the base, the veteran, Steel Ghost, walked alone, unaware of how loud his quiet footsteps had become. Night fell over the motor pool. The Abrams sat under the floodlights, engine now silent but spirit revived. Inside the turret, the engraved plate gleamed softly, catching the last glint of evening. It didn't praise strength. It didn't praise victory. It praised understanding, the rare kind that only comes from surviving the worst and still choosing to stand back up. A simple message but a heavy one. Respect experience. Respect those who've lived what others have only studied. Respect those who carry lessons carved not in ink, but in scars. And that brings us to the end of today's tale. If you enjoyed this story of grit, legacy, and battlefield wisdom, make sure you like, share, and subscribe for more stories in our Legend Lineage series, where real experience meets unforgettable heroism. More legends are waiting. And some of them, like Steel Ghost, still walk among us.